Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to this series of live streams in which I am teaching Django to the people who are just getting started with Django. If you have a knowledge about Django, you are most likely to be bored with this entire series. So I would beg you go and watch the very many other videos I have uploaded on the channel. So yeah, at this point, what we've done is to build this very simple app that has a very simple interface. We can navigate in between pages. We can be in position to view the detail of our products. And that's where we left off last week. So I'm going to be continuing this live stream because I tried to continue with it, but I was somehow messed up, so I couldn't really discuss what I was discussing well. That's why I kind of put down the last live stream. So what we're going to be talking about in this series is going to be forms, and forms are basically Django's way or a web application's way to allow us to be in position to add data or edit data or basically collect data from a user. If you want to add a product, you'll be presented a form like this, which you then fill and then submit, so that the application will either save or edit an item. So if you go to product, we shall see a form right here consisting of inputs that will allow us to add products to our database. So yeah, we're going to be implementing something of that sort. I'm going to begin with a very simple HTML input just to give you the idea of forms and how they work. So I'm going to go to our products page right here. I'll create a new file called products creation, and what this is going to be is a template just like the ones we've been having in the previous videos where we were extending layouts /base.html. So that's going to be our base layout, and then we shall create the main content for that page. So I'll just say main_content. Once that is done, let's now go ahead and write a simple form. We shall start with two form tags. So let me make this a little bit bigger. Now a form can either be get or post, and I'm going to be explaining what those are. But if you write a form, the default attribute you have is going to be the action. Then inside here is where you can define the HTML elements. We shall begin with a very simple H1, which is a heading to basically just tell us that this is for creating a product, or the form for creating a product. And then we can add different content in here. So I'm going to be using Bootstrap styles, but you can feel free to use the styles that you want. But for this case, I'm using Bootstrap for all the styling of our application. Inside our form group, I want this to be a little bit away from the top. So I'll provide a margin top of 2, and then I'll provide a label. So the label, I'm going to be picking fields from our model. So we have name, description, and image URL. So those are exactly what I'm going to be using. I'll go back to our product create form. I'll have our name. So this will be our product name. And then I will come right here, then provide the input from which we are going to collect the name. So I'll give this the name attribute of name, and I'll give it an ID of name. And then I'll do the same thing for the description. So our description will be a text area. So I'll come right here and do the same thing. Then I'll also provide the image URL. So I'll come, provide the product description. I'll say that we're going to have this be the description. And then I will also change our label here to be that of the description. So our name in this case is going to be description, and then the ID for this is going to be a description. But keep in mind that this is a text area. Therefore, instead of having an input of type text, I'm going to have a text area. So I'll change this and make it a text area. The text area has a closing tag, and therefore I'll simply go ahead and close that. For our product image, we shall change the label to have the for attribute being the image URL. So then I'll change this from input type text to input type file, and then here is where we shall get our image URL, and the ID as well will be image URL. But now I haven't yet added any Bootstrap styles. So if I want to access this page, I have to create a view that will render this template. For me to do that, I'll go to our views for the products, and then I'll create something like this. So this is our product detail view, but then if I wanted to create a product create view, I'll say product create view, and here we are going to be making use of the moment you create a view. So it's important to register it or create a mapping on which you'll access that view. For our case, that is going to be product slash create. So that's going to be the URL or the path. And then we shall bring in our view from views dot product create view. Then I'll give the view a name. So for our case, this is going to be product underscore create. And that's what we shall use inside our templates to access this. And also we can pick the URL from the name of the view. So once that is done, I then have to create a link to that page. Keep in mind that I have a navbar, and this navbar is one in which we can go to the different pages. If I take you back here, this is the section I'm referring to. So we can add the link to that navbar by coming at the top right here, and then we can send or we can just basically create a new link here. So I'll change the one for about to product underscore create. So what that will do is to change or provide a link for creating a product. Now if I come back right here and now see that we have a new link, which is the one for creating a product, and if I go there, we now have this simple HTML form we have created. So let's go ahead and add some bootstrap styles. To add bootstrap styles to this, I can go back to the form, which is in product create form.html, and I'm going to be using the form class, the class form control, which is useful for basically adding that 100% width to these forms and making them be their own elements on their own line. I'll do the same thing for this image URL field, which is a file field. And once that is done, I will go back here and refresh. So that will give us that styling from Bootstrap, which is interesting. Now, maybe I can also add to our labels a margin. So maybe let me just add margin top 2, or let me just add margin bottom 2, because I want this to be a little bit spaced. So let me just do exactly that. So yeah, so margin top 2, but for our create that as an input of type, submit, and then the value for this will be save product. So once that is done, we can add some classes right here. So shall have a class of btn and btn submit. So when I refresh, that's what we have, and the class has to actually be btn primary. So yeah, I'll also add some margin top here, which will make that our button. So that is our very simple HTML form, and now let's go ahead and look at what is happening in here. So whenever I create a form in HTML, that form is going to be wrapped inside these two form tags, and the elements or the HTML inputs or selects or checkbox you put inside here will be the ones the user will fill in to submit that form. So this is the form as we've seen it. Now, what happens if we submit this form? For now, we do not have any method on the form, and by default, the method is going to be the get method. So when I say get, all you have to understand is we are trying to just retrieve something from the server. But when I say post, the basic understanding is you are trying to send data to the server. So for that example, when you submit this form, it's going to be just returned to us in a URL, or every value we provide in here is going to be returned in the URL as a query parameter that is going to happen. And if you are confused about what query parameters are, you'll understand them. But when I submit this form, I'll select a random image here and save. You'll notice that this URL is going to become this very long string. If I show it here, this long string is just going to be the URL of our app, which is localhost 8000 /product/create. And then we have the data we've sent via the form field. So we have our name, which is going to be equal to this, and our description, which is going to be equal to this, as well as the image URL. So yeah, that's how it happens in a GET request. Now it's important to understand when to use a GET form and a POST form. And for our case, we want to send data to the server, and therefore we need a POST form. But for simple cases where I want to perform things like searching for items, for example, when I come here and try to search for Blender, when I submit this, you see that data being added here. So in that case, it's easy for you to use a GET form, just like the search form we see here. But for a POST form, we do not expect any data to be added to our URL. So how do we perform that? We add a method attribute onto our form. And the way to do that is by specifying the method. So our method will be post, get, or dialog, but mostly you're going to find yourself using get and post get for basically making a get request where you're retrieving something from the server, and post where you are trying to create or send data to the server for some processing. So yeah, once I have done that, I'll save this form. When I save this form and refresh here, nothing is going to happen for now. But when I try to input some data, select an image, I'll open Save Product is going to tell us that CSRF verification has failed. Now, Django gives us mechanisms that can help us be in position to tackle some security issues that may be involved when you are sending some post data to the server. Whenever you send a post request, the form will encrypt the data and then send that data in a very secure way. That is not like how you've done when you are sending a GET request. So it's important that you do not add in important details or secrets inside this product or inside the form when you are making a GET request. So when making a GET request to the form, it's always for that data you do not risk showing, or the data you do not risk showing to external people or external users. But when you're sending sensitive data like people's user data or secrets or card information, it's always advised that you use post form. And also we need to add this CSRF token. Now if you're wondering what that is, I'm just going to add that here. I'll say CSRF, and that tag will add a hidden field with that token that we are being requested for. So that's just a security measure that Django will add to prevent our forms from submitting raw data. So yeah, it's just something to tackle a CSRF token. So if I go back to our form, try to resend, that is sort of like expired. If we try to add more data here and submit the form, this time we shall see another error. So this error is a 405 method not allowed error. So what this means is that we are trying to submit a form via the post request, but we have only implemented the GET request. So remember, our view for the product create view is a template view, which is only returning the product create form. So how can we make sure that that handles instances in which we send data to the server? The way to do that is to implement a post method on the class. So to do that, we can do def post, and then this will be a method on the class. So we shall say self, and of course it will be a method on the object of the class. That's why we provide self as the first parameter. Then we shall provide a request in here, and let's just say that this will return redirect to a certain page. So let's say it's redirecting to product underscore create. Now let me explain what is happening here. So redirect is a function that we get from the same place where we get the render function. So if I say, from Django.shortcuts, import render. Those are some functions that Django is going to provide for us to help us be in position to get access to what we may have written using. So basically, it provides for you functions to help you be in position to perform some things, but via shortcuts rather than having to use the entire functionality. For example, render is a shortcut for helping us render a template, and it's basically what you get when you do this. So these are the steps that you do: render to string, blah blah blah, and then you return a response. But when you say render, you are simply returning the response. And then what we want in our case is to redirect. So if I redirect, I'm still performing all these actions here. Redirect class, blah blah blah, and then redirect. So basically, it's a very nice way to redirect users. So redirect takes in a URL, but for us to be in position to provide that URL, we can hard code it in, which is good, but then we can also get the name or the name of the view as we've defined in our URLs and use that instead of having to hard code it in there. So we would say return redirect product / create, but instead of doing that, we can just do reverse product create, and that will be the same thing. So to access that reverse function, I'm going to import it by saying from Django.urls import reverse, and once I've imported it, then we can successfully redirect to that URL. If you're confused about how that works, let me show you how it works. I will go to my management shell. So I'll still within my virtual environment run python manage.py shell, and inside there is where I'll import that function. So I'll say from Django.urls import reverse, and once I've imported reverse, then we can simply just come here and say reverse, then we provide the name of the URL. So for our case, if we say product_create, we shall now see that that will return the URL product/create. If I wanted to return the home page, then I can just provide the name of the view for the home page, and that will be the URL for the home page. So that's basically what we mean here. It just is a nicer way compared to hard coding the URL in here. So now that we've defined the post request, let me show you why I was using type hints in the previous videos. So you may have noticed that I imported these two classes, HTTP request and HTTP response. Now the beauty is, if I added that type hint to this HTTP request object and also specify the return type as HTTP response, here I can be in position to easily access the attributes via auto-completion. So if I want to access, let's say, the data that is coming from the post request, so that is going to come through the object request.post. And once I want to access the files that I send, I can also do the same thing by saying files. So let me just make these files from request. I'll say that this is going to be request.files. So this is the object containing the files that are going to come from this request. So I'll save. And once I've saved, then let's try to resubmit the form again. If I refresh and resend, we shall now see in our logs some information that is being returned. So we shall see request data from post that will send our form data with our CSRF token. So that is a hidden field. If you want to see it, you have to inspect your elements in your browser, which will bring you here to your developer tools, and then you'll see that hidden field right here that will contain that string, which is your CSRF token. So that will protect your form against CSRF attacks. Now, yeah, another thing to note is files from this request are going to be sent from request.files, but for now we see an empty dictionary. So for us to make this work, we have selected a file, but it hasn't been sent. We shall go to our form and add a special attribute called the encoding type. So every time you're sending a form with some files, you need to specify that the encoding type is going to be multipath / form data. If you do not, you will not get any file. So right here, the reason as to why I've not got any file is because that attribute was absent. But if I provide some data in here, provide some more data in here, and then add the file, our form will then send some image data. So right now we see that we have our image URL, which is in there. So yeah, at this point, I'm actually seeing everything via request.post. I don't know why. So let me just try to go back to my HTML here and then see. So this is input type file, and then that. So input type file, coding multipath from data. Let me try to save and refresh. It's supposed to return the file. So yeah, now you can see the logs working successfully. So it turns out I had to refresh the form. So in sending the request data, we see the request data has been sent in a separate dictionary, and the image URL has also been sent in a different dictionary. So that's how you go ahead and access what you have written in your form. Request.post being the data in your inputs, and then request.files being the files that you are sending through your form to the server. So that's how you handle forms. That's how you can access the data within your form. And remember, all that is being done through the request object, which you inject into your views. So the view takes in the request, and then through the request you can access the request data, and then you can also get something like the request method. So if I print request dot method, this time I'll see the post method being logged. So let me try it again. I will select a product, and yeah, saving that product will now show you that you are sending the form via post request. So yeah, that's how you handle your forms in Django. So for now, we've been able to look at how to create a form, an HTML form, and how we can extract data out of it when we submit via a post request. So how do we create our forms using Django? Creating forms in Django is easy, and I'm going to be showing you how to do that. We can literally describe these fields like the way we see them here, but using only object-oriented syntax, like how we did with our models. So to do that, we're going to go to our products app, and within our products app, I'm going to go right in here. I'll create a new file. So this new file is going to be called forms.py, and then forms.py is going to contain the forms that we're going to be using for our products app. For now, I'll just go ahead in here and import our forms class, or actually the forms module. So Django provides for us a forms library, and this forms library is necessary to give us classes that can help us to create different types of forms. But for now, let us begin with a very simple form. So I'll begin by creating this as a class called a product create form. And since this is going to be created from our forms, we then have to first of all inherit it from the form class. So this is like the base form from which we can create a form. But then this also inherits from another base form class, but this represents a collection of fields plus their associated data, meaning every attribute we define on here can be a field on that individual form. So it basically represents what we have here. The form class represents this entire form tag, and then whatever we define is basically what these labels and fields are. So if I come back here, I can now say that our name is going to be forms dot, guess what the value for this is going to be? Sheffield. Notice how this is very similar to what we have when we define our form using our mod when we define our model fields. So if I take you back to models.py for products, we now see that our name is form models.char field. Forms have a similar API, so they have a similar set of classes that have almost same like attributes. For example, here I can specify the max length to be 90, just like we defined it on the model, and we can also make this required by saying required equals true, just like that. Then for our description, we can also define it as a char field, but we shall see how we can turn that into a text field. So I can say forms.char field, and then here we can just leave it to that or add a max length. So I can add a max length of, let's say, 5,000, because of course descriptions have to be long. Then for our image URL, we get access to an image field. So I can say forms.image field, and in here I can of course go ahead and specify other things, but let me just leave it like this. So this is our product create form, and this form is what is going to help us to render HTML, but all of that HTML is going to be defined from here in our class. We haven't written any HTML, but we have a way to access the different inputs. So how do we do that? I'll go right in my management shell. I will close what we had here and reopen it once again. So in here, I will go and import that class. I'll say from products.forms, import our product. Did we call it the product create form? Yes. So that's going to be our product create form. And once that is done, now we shall create an object out of that. So if I say product create form, that's an object of the type of that form. Calling form will show us that that's a product object. I mean a product form object or product create form object. But if we want to see the different methods or the different attributes on our form, there is this function called dir in Python. What it does is to return a list of all attributes and methods on a specific object. So for now, if I come and say something like since this is a list, I can iterate on it. I can say for I in dir form, and then I can print I. So what that will do is to go ahead and basically list all the attributes as well as methods that are contained on that object. So what I need in this case is to basically just print out the HTML to show you the HTML that has been rendered, or that will be rendered when we use this form object. So I'll use methods like form.asP. So that's a method you can call on the form. Right now we see that this is the HTML that will be generated automatically for us by Django. So this will allow us to be in position to show that HTML as paragraphs. And then we can also use URL if we want to see our HTML as list tags. So yeah, all we've done is to describe a class, and that class will be converted into HTML. That HTML is that which will be rendered onto our template. So I'm going to exit out of here, and after doing that, I'll close the terminal for now. So let's go ahead and now add that logic to our view. To do that, I'm going to go to views.py, and up here is where I'll import the form. So I'll say from .forms, we're going to go ahead and import our product create form. And once we've created that form or imported it, the next thing is to introduce it to our view right here. To introduce it to our view, since we are using a class, we can define an attribute on the class called the form class attribute, and that will point to the name of our class. Now, if we want to use that within our template, we then have to define the get context data method, which I talked about in the previous video. What it does is to give us access to the context dictionary, and then through it we can also go ahead and modify the context dictionary. So this right here has been what has been initially returned, which can give us access to the current context object. For us to modify this context object, we can then simply add items using a key. So for our case, what we need is to provide our form object, and the way we're going to do that is by calling self.form class. If you're confused about this, form class or self.form class is the name of this form, and these two curly they're not curly braces, they are parentheses, will help us to create an object out of that class, which is basically what we're doing here. Now remember, by default this was returning our context, so I want to go ahead and return the modified context like the way you see it down there. So yeah, this is basically playing around with object-oriented programming, and if you have an idea about object-oriented programming, this will be very easy for you to understand. You have a class right here, and this class can have class attributes like the ones we have here, which we can then access via self. And then yeah, we just have a bunch of methods on here, and then those methods can be useful to help us to perform different things on our view. Now, after defining that form within our context, let us go ahead and replace what we have right here. So to render the form as a whole, we can just simply do something like var, and then we add form. If you're wondering what var is, every time I use this double square or these double curly braces, I am referring to a variable, which is a special way that the Ginger templating language allows us to inject values or variables inside the template. So when I go back here and refresh, we now see our fields coming from our form. So they are not styled for now, but do not worry, we're going to look at how we can fix that. So yeah, that's how our form looks by default. But what if we wanted to access the different attributes like how we had here, where we have a name, we have a description, and we have the image URL? For that, we can go ahead and replace each of these. So rather than rendering an HTML label, we can do something like form dot the name of the field. So in our case, that's a name, and then dot label. So that will bring in the label just like you see right there. And then I will provide the description. So I'll cut this. Actually, this is going to be the form input. So I'll say form.label. Actually, this is form.name. Sorry for that. So I'll say form.name. When I refresh, that's what we shall have. We shall look at styling later, do not worry. So I'll provide the description. So we shall have the same thing right here. If you can't type this fast and you have the general extension, it will give you these snippets. So for now, I can say form.description. So form.description will be that, and then in here I can also provide the, so this is going to be the label, and then this will be the field. So shall have form.description, and that will be that. Then for the next, we shall have our image. So we shall have form.image URL dot label, and then we shall also have our fields, which is form dot image URL dot, actually this is going to be form dot image URL. So yeah, that's going to be our form from Django. Now to add stylings, we're going to be making use of widgets, which are basically Django's way of implementing the default HTML elements. What these widgets help us do is to modify attributes on our existing form. And this is how we actually do it. So in each of the fields we've defined inside our forms, we can add an attribute called the widgets attribute or widget attribute. And that helps us to point to the HTML implementation of that specific input. For example, if we wanted to access the text input or input of type text, Django provides the forms.text input class, through which we can then change the attributes of an HTML input of type text. So for this case, we can maybe change the class attribute, and then that will be the form control attribute. So if I change that, you see that our style has been added on there, which is interesting. We can also do the same thing for our description. I can change. So this is going to have a widget, and this widget is going to be forms dot text area. So text area is going to be the text area in HTML. So if I say attributes, then here we shall have a class, and this class will be our form control. Yeah, I'll save, and that will be our form control. One thing to do here is we can also reduce the amount of rows. So I can just come right here and say rows 3, which will basically reduce the height of the form or the text area. So to continue, I have my image URL field right here, and I'm also going to add styles to that using a widget. So the widget for this is going to be the forms.file input widget. And in here is where we can add our attributes. So this is a dictionary. I'm going to be showing you how easy this is when you are using model forms. So I'll say form control, just like we have done for the other fields. So when I save, this time you'll see that our input has changed to this nicely styled input. So yeah, we can even add margin top if you want. So we can say margin top or margin top empty2, and then you can add margin top empty2. So that's if you have like different classes. So yeah, that is like from Bootstrap styling, and if I refresh, that will add that styling on our inputs, which is interesting. So yeah, that's how you define a form. You create a class. That class is going to inherit from forms.form, and later we shall look at forms.modelForm. And you can be able to define each of the fields you want to be shown on that form, just like we have done right here. So yeah, let's go ahead and see what will happen if we submit some data in here. So I'll provide some realistic data, some realistic data in here. So I'll say sample description, and then I add a URL to an image. When I save, of course, we can't handle that yet, but now we can see that our URLs or our data is being shown here. We have our image showing up in our files, as well as the request data with the data we've provided right here, which is amazing. So that's how you can go ahead and describe a field or describe forms using forms.form. The next thing we're going to do is to describe forms, but this time we're going to describe those forms or create our forms using our models. And Django allows us to do that through what is called model forms. And a model form is simply a class that picks its form definition from how you implemented your models. So if I close what we have here and go to our models.py in products, we have this simple model we created to define how our table is going to be in the database, or our products table for that case. If you want our form to have exactly those fields we've specified on the form, with all the validation form to have a field of name having the max length being equal to 90, then a model form is one way to achieve that without stressing so much about form code. So we shall go back to our forms.py, and in here is where I'll define our model form. So for now, let me just go ahead and comment that out, and then I'll bring in our class. I'll copy the same class name, bring it down here. So instead of inheriting from forms.form, I will inherit from forms.modelForm. So when I inherit from forms.modelForm, this time I'll define a class called the meta class. And what this does is to define some attributes that will influence the behavior of our model form. So this is where we define the model that we want to extract the fields from, and I have to import that product model. So I'll say from dot models shall import our product. And once we've done that, then I'll just come right here and say product. Then the fields are going to be a list of fields I want to add. So if you want to add all fields, you can just use the Danda all attribute. That will return all the fields that are defined on the model. And in case you want to specify some fields, you can do it by providing a list with the name and maybe the description. So I'll put this in quotes, and then I'll add the image underscore URL. So I'll just come right here and I will format my code. So that's how it's going to look for now. And when I go back and refresh, remember the same form is being returned. Right now we see that we have our forms without the styles. If we want to introduce the styles like we did for the widgets, we can make use of the widget attribute on our model form. So we can do something like widget, and widget is a dictionary having each key being the name of that field that we want to change the widget for. So we can copy the widget attribute we had for our text input, and then we provide that in here. So I can come copy this and then paste it in here. So that's going to be forms.text input. I'll remove these comments right here. And then I'll format things to look a little bit bigger. So that's going to be for our name to have the form control MT2 styling. And then I'll do the same thing for our description. Or what I'll do is to just copy what I have here and then I will paste it down there. So I'll say comma and then paste and then format stuff. So this is going to be our name. This is going to be our description. And then for our description, since it's text area, I can add rows, and rows in this case will be 3. Saving and going back here. We currently see nothing. So this is widgets, not widget. That's the mistake I did. So this is not also a text input, it's a text area. So we can change that to text area. And now we see that our text area is now styled. So let's do the same thing for our image URL. So I'll just come right here and say image underscore URL is forms dot. Now one thing I want to also add in here is placeholders, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But for now, let us change our forms dot file input. So I'll say forms dot file input attributes. We shall have our form control and our margin top of 2. So when I save, I'll go back this side and refresh. So that's how we have our form right now. And keep in mind that all these definitions are being picked from our model, which is our product model right here, which is very powerful. In fact, if you saw what we had in our Django admin episode, all the forms that you use when we register your model onto the admin are generated in such a way by the Django web framework. So rather than us defining the fields manually or writing them in HTML, we can just get them from our model using a model form just like we have here. Let's add some placeholders to our fields. So if we want to add a placeholder, we can use our widget since this directly controls the HTML attributes. So I can come in here, provide an attribute called a placeholder. And then I can add in here, enter product name. And then for the description, need to create extra objects from the data we've created, but rather we need to just make sure that our form is populated with the data coming from our model form. And whatever we have is going to be then an object of that model that will then be saved in the database, which is very beautiful because we get to use the form to directly manipulate the data in the database without having to write database specific stuff to handle the data we've so far created. So going back here, I'm going to go to our views.py, and inside our views, we're going to now handle this post request right here using our form. So since we've imported our form and created this attribute, which is a product create form, we can then go ahead and simply create the form object. Our form object in this case is going to be self.form class, and we need to provide the data. Since we already know that our data is request.post, we can provide it in that, and the next thing is going to be the files, which we of course understand are request.files. If we want to check for the validity of this or validate the data, we are going to be using a specific method called form.isValid. So form.isValid will check for any errors within the form, and if the form is valid, it will return true. If there are no errors within the form, then we shall get errors. For now, we shall just pass that, else we shall just redirect to this product create page. So if our data is valid or our form is valid and there are no errors, we shall just pass. But now let's go ahead and implement what we have in here. So let's see how we save an item using our form. So form.save will go ahead and save an item in our database. So this will save the instance or the instance of the model into the database. But if we specify commit equals false, what we get out of here is the object of that model we want to save. But if we do not specify that, then form.save will go ahead and directly save that item in the database. So now what I'll do is to just return redirect, and then I will just take us back to the home page to see the newly created item. So once that is done, in just a few lines, we have handled that form. So let me remove these since we already know what they do, and save. When I refresh and then try to add in some product in here, so let me say Apple MacBook Pro, a laptop for rich programmers, and then I'll add a dummy image in here. So when I save, we now see that that is added as well as the image we have added. Now if you're really wondering why this is happening, is because of what we did in the previous video. We kind of set up our URLs to serve all the media files we are to set in development. So that's why everything we upload to the media folder is going to be shown. So that will automatically create the product images. It will create the product images folder and then add a file there. And then we can be in position to see the file being retrieved. And the reason as to why that is being done is because our model right here in the definition of our image field has that upload to parameter that takes in the folder in which you want to upload those images. We shall look at how to set up a storage service later when we are deploying this app, but for now we are uploading everything in our media folder under the product images field. So that's basically what we have today. If you've enjoyed this live stream, please click the like button. It doesn't really cost a thing, and it helps other people be in position to watch this live stream, which is very simple, very straightforward. And yeah, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I hope to get on live here and create the next series of videos. All right, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.